Welcome, everyone, to Alaska Quarterly Review's Reading and Conversation Series. I am Ronald Spatz, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Alaska Quarterly Review, and this event is being recorded and will be available on demand on the Alaska Quarterly Review YouTube channel. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few important acknowledgments. Alaska Quarterly Review gratefully acknowledges the Anchorage Museum for hosting and providing technical support for this event, and the Center for the Narrative and Lyric Arts, Alaska Quarterly Review's 501c3 umbrella organization, which makes this event possible. I also want to make a land acknowledgement. Alaska Quarterly Review recognizes the indigenous land on which all Alaskans live. Alaska Quarterly Review is located in Anchorage, and Anchorage is Dena'ina homeland. Dena'ina is the language spoken by the traditional, present, and future caretakers of this land, and land acknowledgement opens a space with gratefulness and respect for the contributions, innovations, and contemporary perspective of indigenous peoples and marks our collective movement toward decolonization and equity. Today we are featuring poet Angela Narciso Torres for a reading of her poems, including Ode to a Smith Corona Galaxy typewriter, which first appeared in Alaska Quarterly Review and just won a Pushcart Prize. Angela Narciso Torres is the author of What Happens Is Neither, Four-Way Books, 2021, Blood Orange, winner of the 2013 Willow Books Literature Award for Poetry, and the chapbook To the Bone, Sundress Publications in 2020. Recent work appears in Poetry, Missouri Review, Quarterly West, Cortland Review, and Northwest, Poetry Northwest. Torres has received fellowships from Bread Loaf Writers Conference, Illinois Arts Council, and Ragdale Foundation, and she received first prize in the Yeats Poetry Prize, W.B. Yeats Society of New York. New City magazine named her one of Chicago's Lit's 50, in Chicago. Torres serves as senior and reviews editor for RHINO Poetry. Of her poems, Booklist wrote, Torres plumbs a rich personal history and retrieves everyday experiences ripe for surprises and reimaginings. Publishers Weekly praised her work as an arresting exploration of what it means to lose something essential, highlighting the emotional depth and resonance at the heart of her poetry. It is my pleasure to welcome Angela Narciso Torres.
Thank you so much, Ron, for the kind invitation to read some poems for Alaska Quarterly Review's YouTube channel. And many thanks to Danny Crombie for providing technical support and to the Anchorage Museum for hosting this wonderful series. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be part of it. I'd like to begin with a few poems from my most recent book, What Happens Is Neither, which is an homage and an elegy to my parents who passed in 2019, my mother from Alzheimer's and my father 11 days later from cancer. The book is a record of the ebb and flow of grief following these devastating losses, which began with my mother's diagnosis, but is also an exploration of the ways we recover and rebuild a self after losing one's parents. Many of the poems in this book began as a record of my mother's stories and words, which I felt compelled to write down as her memory began to decline. The opening poem is a list of superstitions and folk wisdom I grew up with that pointed to that other world beneath this one that followed a different set of rules. If you go to bed hungry. If you go to bed hungry, your soul will get up and steal cold rice from the pot. Stop playing with fire before the moon rises, or you'll pee in your sleep. Sweeping the floor after dark sweeps wealth and good fortune out the door. Fork dropped, a gentleman will visit. Spoon, a bashful lady. Bathing after you've cooked over a hot stove makes the veins swell. For safe passage to the guest who leaves mid-meal, turn your plate. The adage goes, coffee stunts growth. 12 grapes on New Year's, the opposite. Advice from the learned, book under your pillow. Never step on, never drop. Every rice grain that remains on your plate, you'll meet again on the footpath to heaven. You'll have to stoop to pick up each one. The next poem is another list poem I wrote during the early stages of my mother's illness, when she was just beginning to lose certain abilities. This one is What I Learned This Week. No more fireflies in northern Indiana. The fish in Lake Erie are dying out because they're ingesting plastic microbeads used in exfoliants. Yellow X's mark trees on our street that workers will axe next week. Ash borers are eating them alive so they cannot absorb water or light. This week I learned my mother is losing dexterity in both hands. But when I play Bach Gounod's Ave Maria on the piano, she lifts her head, motions me to move her wheelchair closer. She leans over the keyboard to try the melody, finding the right notes each time. Her fingers can barely strike the keys, but I hear them. Some say music memory is the last to go. Still, I have no windfalls for the empty baskets of my mother's eyes. When I returned from Manila, the peonies I'd left in half blossom were stunted by spring storms. A bud that will not bloom is called a bullet. One of the phrases my mother often repeated in the early stages of her illness was, "I'm sad." I thought about how she suffered from undiagnosed anxiety and depression for much of her life, even as a highly competent physician and homemaker and a musician and the life of the party to many of her friends. So I wrote this poem about how I experienced this sadness, both as a child and later as an adult. Stone fruit. Her sadness is coarse and thick as a horsehair coat. As a child, I tried it on. Its heavy folds engulfed me. I learned to balance the weight on my head the way fruit sellers carried baskets of mangoes on their crowns. Mornings it cloyed to my throat like the hairy pits of droops. My eyes teared. I tried to spit. It insisted, impeded my breathing. I swallowed the bitter stone, washed it down like the whale who gulped a grown man and kept him in darkness for days. As a child, I learned this from an adult. If you swallow a seed, a tree will grow in your stomach. I nurture her sadness like a sapling. Decades of summers pass. The tree fruits. Lay your hand on my chest. Feel the heft of sour sweet droops my mother's tears have fed. So the book also contains a couple of self-portraits because it is also about redefining the self after two great losses. In writing this next poem, I thought a lot about how we are shaped by our containers, our home environment, first of all, including all the trauma, as well as the nurturing we receive, imperfect as that may be. Excuse me. Self-portrait as water. Why does the body feel more beautiful underwater? Is what goes through me when I break the glass surface, levels rising as I plumb the tub's white womb, this second skin thinner, slicker, gleaming wet as a lacquered bowl, because the simplest of molecules, two H's, one O, love to love each other, cling to what they touch. How this universal solvent swallows every hill, fills the hollows of my surrender. Most forgiving of substances, I resolve to live like you, to fill and be filled, to take the shape of my vessel, dispensing heat, displacing matter, lighter than air. And another self-portrait. I was raised Catholic, and my parents were both Catholic. Dad was particularly devout, and one of his practices was to carry a rosary in his pocket. And in the later years of grieving for my parents, I decided that carrying his rosary was something that gave me a sense of comfort and peace. So this is self-portrait as rosary beads. Curled amid lint and loose change, tucked in a jacket's satin lining, or crushed with used gum in seams of denim, I've known pain clinics and airports, taxi cabs, and stale schoolrooms where time is a honeycomb in winter. I am olive wood, carnelian, plastic, black onyx. I'm rosebuds pressed into fragrant spheres. Your heat is my musk, your worry my fire. Pick your mystery. If Tuesday, sorrowful. If Saturday, glorious. I've held you in grocery lines, picket lines, the hours between sleepless and woken. Hold me. I'm glass, shattered, smoothed by my mother's nerves, pillowed beneath her cheek, counted, accountable, counting, counted on. Crystal dangled on a string or hung from a mirror in a river of traffic, praying for green, for an end, for a mutiny of rain. Litany of sorrows, of praise, I'm a crown of roses, a crown of purple thorns. I'm faithful as breadcrumbs or barbed wire. Lose me to birds or to night's starred thicket. Touch and be splintered, sundered, soothed, surrendered. My scent on your fingertips. I'd like to turn now to two poems that are not in the book. I wrote these two love poems in the past few years. The earlier one is called Amores Perros, and I'm a dog lover, and so this poem is as much about my dog as it is about my husband. I love them both in very different ways, but it seems at times with equal intensity. So I thought of putting them both in a love poem. Amores Perros. Sometimes I love you the way my dog loves his all-beef chew bone, worrying the knuckled corners from every angle, mandibles working like pistons. His eyes glaze over with a faraway look that says he won't quit until he reaches the soft marrow. His paws prop the bone upright. It slips. He can't clutch it tight enough, bite hard enough. A dog's paws weren't meant for gripping. And sometimes I love you the way my dog brushes his flank nonchalant against my legs, then flops on the floor beside me while I read or watch TV. His heft warms. One of us is hungry, the other needs to pee, but we sit, content as wildflowers. Minutes pass, hours. And the next is a more recent love poem. I do love flowers, but they don't seem to like me very much. I tend to kill plants, even if I live in San Diego where everything grows. But gardening is certainly one of my husband's love languages, and that's what inspired this poem. Love language. Across the breakfast table, the stirring and sipping of coffee. Ice blue light flickers from his phone, sheening the crags of his face. Later, he'll chisel the cracked earth, lift the rosebush, a stray tangled in thistle and vine, riddled with snails. Gently he'll pluck the stubborn shells, lay them in the grass. In a clay pot, he's made a bed to plant the rose. But first, he'll nip between thumb and forefinger each black pocked leaf. The roots he'll loosen with a garden hose, running fingers through the strands as one washes a daughter's hair. Tomorrow he'll scan the knuckled stems for buds, furled in the sun like words about to be spoken. And as we come to the close of my reading, I'd like to turn now to the two poems that were published in AQR. They were chosen by guest editor Danusha Lamarius for the 2024 summer and fall issue of AQR. And I'm very grateful to Danusha for seeing something in these poems and to Ron Spatz for publishing them. The first one is To Scoliosis. It's an ode to the misalignment of my spine, which I was diagnosed with when I was 12. And writing this poem seemed an important metaphor for embracing our shadow side. To Scoliosis. My S-curved swan shadow, snake spine sidewinding the pink balloons of lungs, the listing cages of my ribs. I was 12. A doctor took his ruler to my back, predicted I'd grow with one shoulder sloped, a gull's wing tilted slightly to the sea. Like swayed bamboo, this inner compass pining nightly for the moon. From scolios, meaning bent, curved, surly, skewed, perverse. If the track hadn't swerved, could we see beyond the mountain? Would the view from the window be so fine? Don't the trees with gnarled trunks find more light? And the next poem is also an ode, and it's an ode to my father's typewriter, which was a huge part of my childhood. And after his death, I developed a huge obsession with old typewriters. I have the Smith Corona Galaxy behind me, which is part of my growing collection. It's the same model my dad worked on when he was typing reports at night at home as his job as a pathologist in a local hospital. Ode to a Smith Corona Galaxy typewriter. Find me again that teal jewel buried in father's dust-encrusted cave of poems and pathology, papers tipping in piles, a brown reel churning its mournful symphony. Take me to where the blue hours crawled from yellow yawn to drawl of dusk. Bring out the carriage whose rise and fall spelled here or gone, asleep, awake, alone, unafraid. Return me to that solar system, that universe of ciphers, symbols, simplest of lullabies. That nightly waterfall of spurts and starts of mechanized whispers. My father's lips pursed in lamplight, his fingers the blur of 100 woodpeckers. Play me again that skeletal symphony, that tin can tango, jangle of keys, bright ding of bell. O divot, O ink blot, O seed plot of sorrow. O alphabet reliquary, ribcage of memory. If time won't stop, could it slow to the tempo of his staccato, that blue-veined arrhythmia in a corncob of stars? Thank you very much.